Today's daf we're going to be learning is Yevamot Daf Tet Vav. Okay, we have a little bit of a break from all our crazy Yevamot cases and all the back and forth. We're going to have a bit of a different, as we saw already starting in yesterday's daf. We're still going to be within the issue of tzarot and whether they're exempt or not. We're now kind of head into a big machloka Beit Shammai Beit Hillel, which has much broader implications, which is when Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel disagree about something. The question is, did Beit Shammai, even though right in the end we know we generally hold like Beit Hillel, did Beit Shammai continue to do according to their opinion or not? Okay, that's the big question. Okay, or do we have clear centralization of authority and everybody does the same thing? So you're going to see already yesterday we had two attempts to try to get to an answer. One went one way, one went the other way. So it was kind of balanced. In the end, we couldn't prove anything. Today, we're going to see a number of attempts, and all of the attempts today are going to prove that Beit Shammai, in fact, did keep to their opinion of what with their approach. Okay, they acted upon it. It wasn't just that they believed this difference with Beit Hillel, they acted upon their approach, which is very interesting because in the end, we're going to see, I'll give you the structure. It's a super easy structure of today's daf. Content not always as easy, but the structure is very clear, which is number one, we're going to have 3 more attempts to try to get to an answer from different sources. So altogether, 5 attempts, all unsuccessful. We're going to basically say each one can show that either Beit Shammai did continue or they didn't continue. So it doesn't, they didn't go in their own way. They didn't act upon their opinion. So that's not going to be any proof. Then we're going to do, but each source we're going to bring today is going to attempt to prove that they continued in their way. Okay, even though we disprove it, you can see that the Gemara is clearly trying to prove that they did continue in their ways. Then we're going to have 3 questions, 3 difficulties raised against the opinion that lo asu. It's almost one and the same to either get to an answer or say there's difficulty on the other approach. Okay, so 3 attempts that are also going to be unsuccessful. Then we're going to actually bring 2 sources that do prove that Beit Shammai continued to act upon their approach. And with that, we're going to end. We're going to have to explain a little bit the second source. The second source is going to be a little bit unclear. And after we prove from it that Beit Shammai continued to do as they wanted, we're going to have a little discussion about what exactly transpired in that source. And then tomorrow, we're going to continue even a little bit more and bring another source, which is going to be an interesting story in and of itself. Fascinating story. So that's for tomorrow. Okay, let's start from the bottom of Yud Dalet Amud Bet. Tashma, let's learn from here. So again, this is our 3rd attempt to get to an answer. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says, how did the halacha spread? Meaning, really, who do we hold by? Do we hold like Beit Shammai? Do we hold like Beit Hillel on this issue? Remember the issue. Let's review. The issue is, if a woman is married, she happens to be married, let's say, to her uncle. That's tzarat habat. Okay, she's married to her uncle, and her uncle has a second wife. When her uncle dies without children, she ends up falling to yibum to her father. That's forbidden. She can't marry her father, so she's exempt. She can go marry anyone she wants. No need for yibum or chalitza. Her tzara, though, the second wife that was with her, married to the husband, to the uncle, does that second wife, according to what we learned in the first Mishnah, which is Beit Hillel's approach, can go and get married also. She's exempt. That was all those cases, right? She's p'tura, right? She's exempt, she's exempt. So the bat, the daughter, exempts the tzara, the second wife, right? We talked about possible ways of understanding this, maybe because they're like sisters, right? They become connected. Whatever's true for one ends up true for the other, or maybe some other approach, but she's exempt. Beit Shammai says, no. She's not exempt, which means she's not allowed to marry anybody else unless she does yibum or chalitza. So let's assume she does yibum. Now we talk about the ramifications of this halacha for marriage purposes. If she does yibum, all the people on the Beit Hillel side say, what are you talking about? You're not obligated in yibum. If you're not obligated in yibum, you're marrying your husband's brother, which is totally forbidden. And then your kids are going to be mamzerim because that's what we call isur karet, right? It's a severe punishment. You get karet for it. Anything that you get karet for, any kind of relationship that you enter into that is karet, your kids are mamzerim. So Beit Hillel are going to look at Beit Shammai's kids if Beit Shammai in fact do as they do. Beit Hillel are going to look at Beit Shammai's kids as if they're mamzerim in Beit Hillel's eyes. And let's now look at the flip. How are Beit Shammai going to perceive Beit Hillel's children? Well, Beit Hillel's children, if the women go and marry anyone they want without doing yibum or chalitza, they're going to be considered someone who did an isur lav. It's forbidden to go marry out before you take care of yibum or chalitza. So their kids won't be mamzerim, but they will be kids that are problematic, that have done a problematic marriage. Now, what's the status of kids like that? We're going to see, it's a bit of a debate about it. Some people think that they can't marry Kohanim. Okay, that a Kohen can't marry anyone that was from a forbidden union. So even though, right, maybe it's not mamzerim, which is quite severe, because mamzerim can't marry anyone in the Jewish community except for other mamzerim, basically, but or people who are psulei chitun, as they call them, can't get married within Judaism, but they can marry, right, other people, but they can't marry Kohanim. Okay, and they're going to be called pagum. Okay, so either which way, you're going to end up with problems between them, right? We talked about it already, that they still married each other. The Gemara ended up saying they only married each other because they kept lists, and they basically told who can't marry who. And it's not that they just said, oh, I'll trust you and everything, even though it might maybe sounded that way. But anyway, that you can see why this is a big issue. So comes Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, and he says, right, they said to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, what's the halacha? And he says, you can see throughout these sources that it really was a topic that was a serious topic, right? And it confused people for generations, like what we do, because it was a very basic machlokah, which has huge ramifications. So naaseh k'divrei Beit Shammai, and this is exactly what I explained. If we do like Beit Shammai, he says, havla mamzer l'divrei Beit Hillel. Then Beit Hillel is going to view their children as mamzerim because they married the sister's brother without having an obligation of yibum. Naaseh k'divrei Beit Hillel. Havlad pagum l'divrei Beit Shammai. If we do like Beit Hillel, the vlad is going to be pagum, meaning can't marry a Kohen, according to Beit Shammai. So either which way, we're messing up people. So this is a problem. So what does he say? I'm going to come up with the ultimate compromise. Why don't we just say that anyone in this situation, you're the second wife of an Isur Arva to the person you fought to Yibum, so don't do Yibum, because that would be Beit Shammai, but then you're going to end up with Mamzerim, according to Beit Hillel. And don't just go get married, because then you'll have Psulei, right, people who can't marry Kohanim from your children, because that's Isur Lav, according to Beit Shammai. So why don't you just do Chalitza? Chalitza is the easiest solution. And even though Chalitza is not the easiest thing, it's not so simple a procedure for the woman or even the man to go through. But, let's just do Chalitza. It's the best, right? It's an easy way to resolve. Again, I say easy, it's not such an easy way, but let's just say it from their mind right now. It's a pretty simple way to basically resolve our problems. Say you think, right, just in case there's a yibum on me, so do chalitza with the brother. Now, if you're not supposed to marry the brother, there's no issur to do chalitza. The problem is to marry him. That's correct, to enter into a relationship with him, but to sever a relationship, no problem, right? Of course, you do create a problem here, which is the woman now can't marry a Kohen, but they're not so worried about that. Okay, even though that is a bit of an issue, but many times they make a woman do a get misafek because you'd rather not be dealing with current issues, right? So if we have to limit her and she can't marry a Kohen, right, it's also a downside of this approach. Anyway, we're going to see a much bigger downside of this approach than that. So anyway, he suggests, why don't we do this? Something very interesting happens. We don't know what exactly, but they wanted to come and vote on this. According, right, this is like classic, right? Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri suggests this suggestion. They say, okay, let's vote on it. Let's decide. Let's deliberate. Let's vote. Let's figure it out. And something happened. We don't know what. Some people say there was a war. There was something that prevented them from finishing this. Sometimes I think they see it as a sign from the heavens, right? Maybe it was good that we didn't actually do this. And in fact, Amarlo, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says to him, some people say this happened after the war was over and they went back to deal with it, or we don't exactly know if they even went back to deal with it. But Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says there's a big problem with your suggestion. And maybe like it was good that this didn't happen and you didn't vote on it right then and there and pass this bill, right? This is classic, right? You pass a bill in the court or in the Knesset or in the wherever, the parliament, the Congress, and then all of a sudden you realize there's huge ramifications to what you did. Okay, so this is what Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says. What are you going to do to people now? Okay, there's a debate about what exactly the concern is, but basically saying is, if you institute chalitza right now and you say chalitza, no yibum, or you're basically saying two things. Number one, you can't do yibum like Beit Shammai. Number two, you can't just get married like Beit Hillel. The biggest ramification is if you institute right now that all women who are in this situation have to do chalitza, you're basically going to create a situation where anyone who did Yibum before, like Beit Shammai, is basically now going to be perceived in the eyes of people, whether this is true or not, it almost doesn't matter. People are going to say, oh, you can't do Yibum. And if you did Yibum, it's like sleeping with your brother's wife. Your brother's, it's like you slept with the man, slept with his brother's wife. And that's karet. Retroactively, people are going to view their children as mamzerim. And he says, if you make, many times we look at the court deciding something as looking toward the future. We want to resolve a problem in the future of mamzerim. But he says it's very nice you want to resolve this problem of either mamzerim or people who can't marry kohanim, and that you're creating this huge problem. But you don't realize that as soon as you say this, you're creating a huge problem for people who have done this already. Okay, that even the people who held like Beit Shammai right now are going to perceive their children as mamzerim, because they're going to say, oh, it looks like the court doesn't approve of what we did. And the court doesn't allow Yibum, and you're going to create a mamzer situation for all these people that have already done. Some people explain this a little differently, but anyway, there's ways to explain it. But basically, the concept is very clear, which is you have to go backwards. Also, you have to look at what the ramifications are for those who have already done these things. Right? You could say the same thing. All the women who are married according to Rabbi Beit Hillel, who got married without chalitza, now all of a sudden you're instituting chalitza. That's also going to create a problem for them. It's as if they're married to their husbands, and they're not allowed to be. So he says it's a really big problem, and it's not good to do this. Now, we got sidetracked into the source, but why did we bring this? To prove that asu Beit Shammai k'divrei. Why? When he says, what are we going to do that tzarot rishonot that got married like Beit Shammai? Well, then obviously people got married like Beit Shammai. Otherwise, you wouldn't have to worry. If everyone always held like Beit Hillel, then you really wouldn't have to worry about this so much. But if you said they didn't do like Beit Shammai, then what are we worried about? No one's going to be mamzer retroactively because nobody did like Beit Shammai. Nobody did Yibum. All we're doing is, instead of saying you could go get married, we institute that you need to do chalitza first. It's not as big a deal, right? It's in terms of Beit. You're not making anyone into a mamzer. So Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, lo nitzrecha ela litzaratzma. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, no, that's not the only way to understand the source. Rabban Gamliel could have been talking about the tzara herself, meaning, and this is, now we're going the Beit Hillel route, assuming they only did like Beit Hillel, and now you're saying you can't just get married without chalitza, and all these women, right, I got married 10 years ago through chalitza, let's say, okay, so let's say, right, they make this takana, and it turns out 10 years before my husband had died, I got married to some random guy, I never did chalitza, now I'm 10 years later into my marriage, and they make this takana, you have to do chalitza first. Now I'm sitting in my house, I hear this takana, right? I have to do chalitza now because I'm not really allowed to be married to my husband unless I do chalitza. So the Gemara says, here's the problem. This is what Rabban Gamliel didn't like. When he said, what are we to do with the tzarot? This is what I meant. It's not that they were worried about mamzerim issues, those who held like Beit Shammai. No, nobody really held like Beit Shammai. But the problem is, if we want to at least address Beit Shammai's opinion and then make all these women do chalitza, we have a separate problem. The people who hold like Beit Shammai, and really you can ask this question even not to the people who hold like Beit Shammai, but any of these people, what are we going to do with them? Lichlitzu. Okay, so the obvious would be make them do chalitza now. But now, imagine I'm married 10 years to my husband, and now they make me do chalitza. Mima aseh gavrayu. The men, meaning the people that we're married to, are going to say, oh my goodness, now you're doing chalitza, meaning I wasn't allowed to be married to you before. He's going to want to either stay away from his wife or feel like, oh my goodness, I've been married for 10 years, be isul, right? It's going to create this stress between the couple, like, how did I marry you and you didn't deal with this properly? Or some sort of, right? You can, however, this mimase is a weird word because it sounds like the women are going to be despicable in the eyes of the men. I don't think they really mean that. They just mean it creates this horrible tension between the couple. What, we were married for 10 years and it was forbidden for us to be married? And maybe you'll say, look, we need to make this takana. We need to deal with future generations. We don't really care if that's the case. Okay, whatever. So it'll be unpleasant for you. Well, we don't want to make things unpleasant because another great line, right? It's a pasuk from Mishlei. We know this, we've said this pasuk all the time in our davening. The ways of Torah are pleasant and its paths are peaceful, meaning we don't want to create a halacha that's going to cause tension between husband and wife and create a situation where people all of a sudden say, oh my God, we've been living together, and it's forbidden. Now, even though it wasn't, this creates a perception in people's eyes, right? Much of what we're discussing today is, what people are going to think. People are going to think their kids are moms. People are going to think, right? It creates this sense that so many things were done wrong before and will have ramifications on all sorts of things. So that's not a good solution. And that's why Rabban Gamliel didn't like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. But the point is, why did we bring this? Because this source could now, we tried to bring it to say Beit Shammai clearly acted upon their opinion. In the end, we say, no, not necessarily. Could read the source otherwise. Source number 4, again, attempt number 2 for today, attempt number 4 altogether. Tashma, Amal Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon was known, you might remember him from Brachot, famous story, are you supposed to actually lie down when you do Kriyat Shema at night? And Rabbi Tarfon says, I actually lie down, like Beit Shammai said, and I almost endangered my life, right? And then they said, oh, you should have gotten killed, you shouldn't be holding like Beit Shammai. It's interesting, they don't even bring up that sugya, but it's a different type of sugya, the Kriyat Shema. But anyway, Tarfon was clearly a Beit Shammai student. And he says, Ta'evni, I really am yearning to be in a situation. Matai tavot sarat habat liyadi ve'asa'ena. I'm dying to be in a situation where, I shouldn't say dying here, right? Where my brother, who's married to my daughter, dies, and I will marry her for Yibum purposes. Now, that's a very odd line, right? Well, he's basically wishing his brother's death, and he wants to basically, what does he want to do? He wants to not marry his daughter. Sorry, I think I said that wrong in Yibum. Not marry his daughter. His daughter is obviously exempt, but he wants to end up marrying his Sarat Habat, the second wife of his brother, okay? Even though his brother was married to his daughter. And according to Beit Hillel, he would be exempt. So there you see, obviously they must have held like Beit Shammai because he wants to say, now why is he dying to do this? Not because he's dying for his brother to die, but he wants to show the halachas like Beit Shammai. This matches who he was in Bracha, where he's trying to show the Shammai tradition. So clearly we hold like Shammai. But no, you can understand this differently. Ema va'asiena. Maybe what he's saying is I'm dying to get into a situation where I can go marry off a woman who, fell to Yibum, not my brother. He's not wishing his brother's death. He's wishing a situation, which is still a little difficult, where a man would die childless, married to, this is sometimes people who live in the world of learning want like a real life example of something that they've been dying to see in practice. It doesn't happen so often, right? Where you need 2 things. You need a man to die without children, and you need to marry to 2 women. You need a few things. And one of the women happens to be Erva to his brother. So I want to be in a situation where I can then go marry her off, like Beit Hillel, to some random person without doing Yibum. Maybe that's how it's read, and then it doesn't prove anything about Beit Shammai. The Gemara doesn't really like that reading because they say, what are you talking about? Hata'evni kamar. He says, I'm dying to get into this situation. What do you mean? This is Beit Hillel. This is the obvious approach. This isn't like a big unique something. Why is he waiting for a unique opportunity to prove Beit Hillel? Everybody knows we hold like Beit Hillel. So it's very strange to explain it that way. Say, no, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Apparently, maybe in his time, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri's suggestion was still pretty strong. And remember, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri said, let's make her do chalitza first. And he didn't like that. He said, there's no reason to make her do chalitza. I want to get into a situation where I can prove that there's no need to do chalitza and she could just go and get married like Beit Hillel, in which case this proves nothing about Beit Shammai at all, whether they did or didn't do like Beit Shammai. Okay. Next source. Okay, the situation we thought Rabbi Tarfon was discussing actually happened with Rabban Gamliel. His daughter was married to his brother, and his brother died without children, make below banim. V'yibem Rabban Gamliel et sarata. This source sounds very clear. He did yibum with her sarat, meaning his brother, let's say, Rabban Gamliel's brother, Shimon, married 2 wives. One of them was Rabban Gamliel's daughter. He died without children. The daughter fell to yibum, which exempt from yibum, and she didn't exempt the tzara because that's Beit Shammai's opinion. So it sounds like clearly people held like Beit Shammai, including Rabban Gamliel. Gemara doesn't like this at all. The Gemara says, "V'tizbera Rabban Gamliel mitamidei Beit Shammai who? Since when does Rabban Gamliel hold like Beit Shammai?" That's not the case. Okay, Tarfon, yes, we know held like Beit Shammai many times, but Rabban Gamliel, we never saw that. So it'd be very odd that all of a sudden in this issue he'd hold like Beit Shammai. So Elashani, the Gemara suggests, and we're going to have a problem with this suggestion in a minute, the Gemara suggests maybe this was a unique case. What could be the unique case? Remember we learned this in the Mishnah? Elashani b'tosha Rabban Gamliel, the Ailonit Havai. Maybe his daughter was an Ailonit, meaning she couldn't have children, right? And we talked about the major case of an Ilonit is the standard case, and I'm going to say this because it's going to come up in a minute, is he didn't know she was an Ilonit, the brother, right? The uncle married the daughter, not knowing she was an Ilonit. Maybe she was young at the time, and they didn't know that she wasn't going to ever come up, have signs of puberty or anything. As he was married to her, it turned out she was an Ilonit. We say that the marriage retroactively is annulled. It's as if they weren't married because he married her assuming that she could bear children. And therefore, when she falls to Yibum, she's not actually really married to him. So therefore, she doesn't exempt the tzara, and that's why Rabbi Gamliel married the tzara. So that's a good explanation, in which case this has nothing to do with Beit Shammai. Well, the Gemara says that sounds like a good explanation, but it contradicts the next line in the Braita. The next line is, Hamid Katani Seifa, Acherim Omrim. Other people say, meaning there was a debate about what exactly the reality was. Other people say, Bitol Shor Rabban Gamliel, Ilonit Taita. Other people say she was an Ilonit, which means Tanakama clearly doesn't hold she was an Ilonit. Otherwise, we don't need to bring this extra opinion. So to say that that's what Tanakama thought doesn't make any sense from the continuation. Michlal, from there you can infer, Tanakama Savar Lav Ilonit Taita. Clearly, Tanakama didn't think she was an Ilonit. So the question is, what's the debate between them? The Gemara is going to bring three explanations. I charted it out on the sheet. It can help you if you want, which is maybe the first explanation is going to be there were two types of Iloniot, okay, as we said before. One is he knew when he married her she was an Ilonit. One is he didn't know. And the machaloka between Acherim and Tanakama is, what do we hold in a situation like that? So we're going to say like this: Hikirba velo ikirba. Sorry, I lost my place for a second. Ikirba velo ikirba ikabenayu. The machloket is between if he knew she was an Ilonit or he didn't know she was an Ilonit. Meaning, again, I said just before that the main opinion is if he didn't know she was an Ilonit and married her, then the marriage is retroactively annulled. And that's what Tanakama held. Tanakama holds that if she was an Ilonit from the beginning, he knew it going into marriage. You can't claim that was a mekach ta'ud, it was a mistake in marriage. He knew what he was getting into and he married her anyway, in which case she's married, in which case she doesn't exempt her, she exempts her second wife because she's considered married. That's Tanakama. So Tanakama would say she was an Ilonit of the type that she was found out to be an Ilonit during the marriage. Acherim are saying, no. She was an Ilonit from the beginning. And even though she was an Ilonit from the beginning, and he knew, and you can't say retroactively the marriage was annulled, but still she exempts the tzara. Why? Because she's not a player in the Yibum story because she can't have children. So since she's not a player, she exempts, right? That tzara is a free entity, right? Then she basically has to do Yibum with the brother. So two different approaches as to what type of Ilonit she was. Okay. Now, next two options are going to be different, which is, remember what we have in the Braita. The Braita tells us, Tanakama just says he married the Tzarat Abat. We don't know why. And the second opinion, Acherim says it's because she was an Ilonit. So the first explanation had both of them saying Ilonit, just different types of Iloniot. And it reflected a machloka between them about a basic issue about the Ilonit, who was an Ilonit from the beginning. But the second and third approaches are to say it was a totally different machloket. And one held that she's going to the tzara, right? There's a disconnect between her and the tzara because of a unique situation. And the other one didn't agree with that. So the Acherim brought a different answer, which was she was an Ilonit. Okay. So it's going to go back to that basically, which is one's going to hold Ilonit and one's going to say it was something else entirely. So the next option is Ibai Tema, Kanasu Levasof Geresh Ika Benai. The machloket is, right, until now we've been saying, and we did mention this case before, but generally the case is two women were married. They were married at the time that he died, right? And then because of that, one is Erva, one exempts the other. What if Kines V'acharkach Ulevasof Geresh? What if he married, okay, so we take Rabban Gamliel's brother. He married Rabban Gamliel's daughter, his niece. Then he married another woman, Shula, we'll call her because she's our tzara always. He marries Shula. Then he divorces Rabban Gamliel's daughter. And then he dies. And at the time he dies, he's only married to Shula. So there's a debate about whether, since they were already married to the same man, does Rabban Gamliel's daughter exempt Shula or not? So Tanakama holds that since she was already divorced, she was out of the picture, and the tzara has to do yibum because they're no longer connected. The second opinion, who had to use this excuse that she was an Ilonit, obviously doesn't hold that way and thinks since they were married together at some point, the tzara is exempt from yibum, and therefore the reason why the tzara was chayav in yibum with Rabban Gamliel was only because of some other reason, which was she was an Ilonit. Third option is a different thing, which we haven't seen yet, which is ibayit em. Alternatively, you could say yesh tanai b'bia ika b'nai. the opinion of Tanakama. Again, this is a classic case where you have a situation, we know something happened, and we have a lot of different opinions about what the details were, because we don't really know. And everyone's kind of coming up with details that would make sense to them. What if you got married on condition? Okay, this happens. We'll get to Gitin and Kiddushin. Lots of times you get a get or a marriage on condition. Condition that I will do something for you, or condition, any kind of condition. So now you get married upon condition. Then you have relations together. Now, the question is, if the condition ultimately, right, you have your timeline. So here's the marriage, here's the bi'ah, the consummation of the marriage, and later on, the condition is never fulfilled. So the question is, are you not married? You already consummated the marriage. So can we say we ignore it? And really, in the end, your kiddushin was never kiddushin because you never fulfilled your condition. So according to Tanakama, yes, we say that. And therefore, that's what happened here. She must have been married on condition to the brother, and the condition was never fulfilled. In which case, even though they lived a married life together, in the end, the condition was never fulfilled. And it turns out they were never really married. So in all these cases, Tanakama is basically saying there was never a marriage to begin with. And then that's why the tzara was exempt. The second opinion, Acherim, who says, no, that's not the reason it was an island, because they disagree. They say there's this concept, nobody would want to retroactively say, I ended up out of wedlock, in this relationship with this woman. You would never want to do that. So even though the condition wasn't fulfilled, he actually had always intended to marry her anyway. Okay. And that the marriage is a good marriage since they consummated the marriage. And therefore, that can't be the case. Why she exempted her tzara? It must be some other reason. And they come up with the Iloni reason. Okay. So those are three different nafkaminas between them, three different approaches as to what the debate was. Okay, but in any case, this doesn't prove anything about Beit Shammai doing Kedivrei Ham, because Rabban Gamliel was clearly holding by Beit Hillel. There was a different reason, whatever it might be, for the exemption here. Why? And that's why the bat is out of the picture and the tzara ends up having to do Yibum. Mativ Rab. So those were our three attempts today. We had so far Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri and his attempt to do the takana, and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel's retort, which proved that we tried to prove Beit Shammai Asu, we didn't prove it. Then we have Rabbi Tarfon, who also we tried to prove it, we couldn't. And then we have Rabban Gamliel. Okay, so stories with famous rabbis, and none of them can really prove it. Mativ Rav Misharshia. Now we're going to have three questions. One Rav Misharshia brings, two Rav Zutra brings. And this is all against Lo Asu Beit Shammai. Again, trying to prove Beit Shammai did like their opinion. Maseh Rabbi Akiva. We're now going to get off topic into other machlokot between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. And the assumption is, if in other machlokot Beit Shammai did, according to their opinion, it would be the same by us. There was a case with Rabbi Akiva. These both we've seen before, the first two. Sheliket etrog be'echa b'shvat. He picked an etrog on the first of Shvat. The question is, what year is it? If you remember, famous machlokot, beginning of Masechet Rosh Hashanah, is it the first of Shvat or the 15th of Shvat that determines the year for Maaser? So in years 1, 2, 4, and 5, you do Maaser Sheni. In years 3 and 6, you do Maaser Ani. So let's say it was the beginning of year 3, possibly still the end of year 2, because it's a Chab Shvat. We don't know what date. So he would take 2 Isurim. He would do both Isurim with an Ayin, not Asur with an Aleph. Isurim Maaser. He would do 1 tithe for Maaser Sheni, for the second tithe, and 1 he would do for Maaser Ani for the poor. So what do you see? Obviously, Shema Mina Asu, which would go against the opinion that Lo Asu. So the Gemara says no, and we learned this last time. We learned this source. Rabbi Akiva Gemara is to Pikle. He didn't know what Beit Hillel. He had a problem with the tradition. He didn't know what Beit Hillel actually held. Right? Something that's so basic to us, right? Tu B'Shvat is the date. He didn't know, was that Beit Hillel's opinion or Beit Shammai's opinion? And that's why he kept 2, because he just wasn't sure what Beit Hillel held. Not that he wanted to hold like Beit Shammai. So we reject that source again. Mativ Marzutra. Marzutra brings a question. Very famous story. She gives birth, and the daughter of Shammai, the elder, he held that a katan is chayav and mitzvot as soon as they're born, even on certain things, and he basically made a hole in the roof and put some schach on top right over the cradle of the baby so that the baby would be in a sukkah. Shema mina asu. So what do you see from here? Clearly, they held like Beit Shammai. Now, this you could claim, right? This is Shammai as I can. This is even before this Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel. Interesting, they bring this as a proof. But anyway, they reject it for a different reason. Hatam haro'eh omer la'afu she'avir ka'avud. Now, what's the problem with holding like Beit Shammai? We don't want it to be obvious that you're holding like Beit Shammai. They seem to have no problem if you want to be stringent in your own house and do whatever you want, as long as it's not obvious that you're doing it like Beit Shammai. So in this case, what Shammai HaZaken did by making a hole in his roof, he could have been wanting a skylight in his house. He could have wanted some fresh air. Not clear. Now it's true. He put schachan in and it was sukkahs. It would be a little bit weird, but you could somehow read into it that maybe he just wanted some air in his house and he wasn't actually doing it for the mitzvah of sukkah, in which case, as long as it's not obvious you're holding like Beit Shammai, then it's fine. So that doesn't prove that people actually did like Beit Shammai, because we want a case where it's going to be you did like Beit Shammai and right, it was clear you did like Beit Shammai, like Yibum, for example, right? You do Yibum, it's obvious you're holding like Beit Shammai. There's no other way to read that situation. Mativ Marzutra. Third question, and then we'll go and we'll finally get to our two sources that actually prove that Beit Shammai actually did like their opinion. Maaseh b'shokat Yehu. There was a trough of Yehu. Okay, Yehu was a king in the time of Melachim. So there was a trough that was named Shokat Yehu. Shaita b'Yerushalayim. It was in Jerusalem. Hayta mikuva lemikvah. There was a hole between it and the mikvah to allow waters to go through, to basically make it a kosher mikvah. We talked about this before. Hashaka, right, when it's touching kosher waters, and right, it can be as if, and it's filling up also from there so that it ends up with water, enough water to be a mikvah. B'chol taharot, this is clearly an exaggeration, but all taharot shayu b'Yerushalayim nasim al gaba. Okay, this is where this was the mikvah used in Jerusalem. V'shalchu Beit Shammai b'Rchivua. Beit Shammai came and they widened the hole between the two. They wanted it to be very big. Beit Shammai omrim, why'd they do this? Because they held ad shtibachet beruba. Has to be mostly open. Okay, it has to be more open than closed. If you remember, Utnan, what's Beit Hillel's opinion? Eruv mikvaot kishvoferet hano be'ovyal b'chalala. Remember, if you want to put two mikvaot together, the thickness of the connector between them, the open hole between them, has to be like the opening of a flask, right? Like the tube that goes into the flask. Be'ovyal b'chalala, right? The thickness of it and the hole. It's like two fingers that you can twist around. You have to have enough space to twist your fingers around, but it certainly doesn't need to be open. Biruba. And what do you see they did? They did it. They opened it biruba. Shma mina asu. Clearly you see from here they held like Beit Shammai. So the Gemara answers, no. Hatam haro'eh omer lafu shemayu d'kavi. Same thing here. You won't assume that you did it because you need this huge opening between them. Yes, that's why they did it. But it's not considered asuki divrei because people could think that they just wanted the water to flow more freely in order to fill it up so it would have the requisite amount. And maybe because of that, they opened it up wide. Because, right, when you have water and you have a small opening, the water's not going to flow so well. So they wanted the water to flow very strongly, so they opened it much bigger. And then it's not clear they did it like Beit Shammai, so that doesn't prove anything. Tashma. So now we finally get to our source that's going to prove that Beit Shammai did Kidivrehem. Ta'amar Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok, we have some interesting stories now. He says, K'shayiti lomed Torah etzel Rabbi Yochanan HaChorani, when I was learning Torah by Rabbi Yochanan HaChorani, ra'iti shaya ochel pat chariva b'melach b'shnei batzoret. I saw he basically had bread and salt. That's all he ate, and there was a what do you call it, a famine? Okay, a drought. Actually, it was a drought, and he had no food. So what did he do? Right? I was learning Torah with him. I went back and I told my father, Amar li, holech lo zeitim. So his father, Rabbi Tzadok. Okay? Rabbi Tzadok says to him, here, bring him some olives. So Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Tzadok says, listen, I brought him some olives, and you'd think the guy would eat them, but what did he do? He saw that they were wet. Now, what's the problem if they're wet? Remember the whole laws of susceptibility to impurity? If they're wet, they're going to be potentially susceptible to impurity, but only under what condition? That you wanted the water to be there. We had this whole discussion of olives because olives have this, right? You let them sit, a little bit of juices come out and they get a little bit wet. Now, the question is, do you want them to come out or not? So it sort of depends. So right now, we don't yet know what the situation was, but he saw they were wet. So what did Rabbi Yochanan HaChorani say? Amar li, he didn't want to insult him. So he says, Ein ani ochel zeitim. I don't eat olives. Tough. Bati vodati et abi. He goes home very upset. He goes home to his father. He says, listen, you didn't want to eat my olives. Amar li, lech ve'emorlo. The father, Rabbi Tzadok, was smart. He realized what was going on here. He says, go tell him, chavit nikuva haita. It was a barrel. The olives were collected in a barrel that had holes in it. Elas shestamu shmarim. What happened? The dregs closed up the holes, and that's why the water was kept in. but I put it in a barrel that had holes because I wanted the water to drip out. Now, if you want, not the water, but the liquid. So if you wanted the moisture, really, it's the moisture on the olives. So if you wanted the moisture to drip out, then obviously you didn't want it there, in which case they're not susceptible to impurity. So he says, go tell him that this is how I did it. So now the Gemara says, okay, now we have to understand that there's a basic machloka Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel here. Remember, we saw the other day that Beit Shammai were more lenient when it came to Tum and Tara. We're going to see the same thing here. Utnan chavit shel zeitim megulgalim. If you have olives that are pickling, Beit Shammai omrim, or preserving, Beit Shammai omrim ein tzricha linakev. You don't need to make holes. No matter what, we assume you don't want the moisture there and it's not susceptible to impurity. Beit Hillel omrim tzarich linakev. Beit Hillel says, no. You have to have holes there if you don't want it to become impure or susceptible to impurity. Umodim, they all agree though, she'im nikva ustamua shmarim, they all agree if you had holes, but they got closed up by the dregs, she'i teora. Everyone agrees there, and there's even Beit Hillel that say it has to have holes. If it had holes, but they got closed up, that's fine. Okay, but the main point is the Beit Hillel is the one who says it's okay. Now, so what does that have to do with Beit Shammai and whether they did like Beit Shammai? Well, this next line is the key line. Afal pisha talmid Shammai haya. Even though, now there's a big debate who he is, okay, either Rabbi Yochanan HaChorani or Rabbi Tzadok, we don't know who. Let's just go with Rabbi Tzadok. Even though Rabbi Tzadok was a Talmid of Beit Shammai, in which case we have the reason why Rabbi Yochanan HaChorani suspected him. He suspected that it wasn't in Chavit Nikuva because he held like Beit Shammai, which didn't require it, but Rabbi Yochanan HaChorani didn't hold that way. So even though Talmid Shammai, Kol Ma'asav Lo Asa Ela K'divrei Beit Hillel. Even though he was a Talmid of Shammai, he actually really held like Beit Hillel when it came to practice. Now, the whole key is that last line, which told you, even though, let's just assume it's talking about Rabbi Tzadok, even though Rabbi Tzadok was a Talmid of Beit Shammai, and theoretically he didn't have to put it in this barrel that had holes, he did anyway, because he was very careful to practice like Beit Hillel. So if you say Bishlama Asu Hainu Ribute, it's making him sound like he was unique among the students of Beit Shammai, right? If you hadn't known this, you would have assumed he did like Beit Shammai. So that must prove that in general, the students of Shammai did like Beit Shammai. If nobody did like Beit Shammai, then you wouldn't need to tell us that he didn't hold like Beit Shammai either. So that proves that generally, now he didn't, he was an exception, but generally people must have held like Beit Shammai. And that's our first proof. Here's our second proof, Tashma. Shaluat Rabbi Yoshua. They asked Rabbi Yoshua the following question. Again, we see how this was a big question that was bothering everybody. You'll see with the story next tomorrow also. Tzarat habat mahu. What's the halacha of the tzarat habat? Do we hold like Beit Shammai? Do we hold like Beit Hillel? Now we come to a good answer, or maybe not. Amar lehem, this is what you call a rabbi who wants to keep on the safe side and not get attacked by people. Mipnei ma atem machnisim roshi ben shnei harim gdolim. Why are you putting my head in between two giant mountains? You can see why this issue of Beit Shammai Beit Hillel was the most important issue because it affected who marries who, right? Those are the biggest issues because that's what brings us together, right? If we start saying you can't marry my kids and I can't marry your kids, you're going to create a huge problem. He says, I don't want to get in the middle of this. This is a huge machloket between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Mit yareani, I'm scared. Shema yerutzu gulgolti. They're going to chop off my head. And who's going to chop off his head? The students of Beit Shammai, if I hold like Beit Shammai, what am I going to say? Do Yibum. If we do Yibum, what's going to happen? All the Beit Hillel people are going to view those people as mamzerim, right? I don't want to create a situation where I'm going to basically say that I hold like, if I say I hold like Beit Hillel, then anyone who got married like Beit Shammai is going to be a mamzer. And all those people that I now call a mamzer from what I rule are going to come and kill me, right? Because I've ruined their lives because now they're mamzerim. So he's like, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole, staying far away. Then he tells them a very strange line because nobody really knows how this connects. Aval ani me'id lachem, but I'm going to testify to you. Al shtei mishpachot gedolot shayu b'Yerushalayim, two big families that were in Jerusalem, mishpachat beit Tzvo'i mibein Achmai, and mishpachat beit Kofai mibein Mikoshesh, shehem b'nei tzarot. They're the sons of tzarot. Okay, we don't yet know exactly what kind of tzarot. Did they marry or did they not marry? Did they do yibum? Did they not do yibum? Umehem kohanim gdolim v'shimshu al gabei hamizbech. And their sons became kohanim gdolim, meaning Nobody had an issue with their genealogy and their past. So now we don't really know what that has to do with anything. We're going to explain. First, we want to see how this proves our point. If people actually follow Beit Shammai, that's why he said Mitirayani. I'm scared of all those people who follow Beit Shammai and are now going to retroactively make them mamzerim. They're going to kill me. So that makes sense. But if you say nobody held like Beit Shammai, well then, Amai Kamar Mitirayani. He doesn't need to say, I'm scared. There's no one to be scared of. Because remember, if he says, right, we hold like Beit Hillel, so worst case, it's Chayve Lavim, right? And Chayve Lavim are not mamzerim, so it's not a problem. So, Hama Rabbi Yeshua. So now the Gemara questions this and says, wait, Nihi Nami da Asu, even if you say Asu, my mityarani, what would he be scared of if people did like Beit Shammai? Hama Rabbi Yeshua, ein mamzer ela michayve mito beitin. Now they say, wait a minute. Even according to Rabbi Yeshua, there'd be no mamzer problem here. Why would there be no mamzer problem? Because Rabbi Yeshua, according to him, he has a third opinion. We've seen about mamzer. We said mamzer is either michayve kritut, even maybe michayve lavim. We saw Rabbi Akiva's extreme approach that anyone who's chayve lavim gets his kids are mamzerim. Then we now see Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua said only if it's a court-instituted punishment. Now, Eshet Ha'ach is not court-instituted. It's karet in the hands of God. So if it's karet, then there's no mamzerim. So according to his approach, there shouldn't be a mamzer problem in any case, because his opinion is chayve mito beitin is the only thing that makes mamzerim, not chayve kritu. So it wouldn't be mamzer. So they say, well, nihi de mamzer lo have pagum miahav. You might not be a mamzer, but you won't be able to marry a Kohen. So I'm going to get a lot of people pissed off because I'm going to make their children pasul for Kohanim. How do we know that they would be pasul from Kohanim? Anyone, according to him, who thinks it's only mita beitin, court-instituted punishments, but not karet, why are their kids going to be mamzerin? Pagum to Kohanim. They can't marry Kohanim. Kavachomer mi'almana. It's a kavachomer from a widow. A widow can't marry a Kohen Gadol, a high priest. It's unique just to her, right? Just to Kohanim. It's not to anybody. She can marry anybody, just not a Kohen Gadol. And yet, Bina Pagum, what happens to her? She can no longer, let's say her husband dies, Kohen Gadol dies, she can no longer marry a regular Kohen, even though a regular widow can marry a Kohen, she can't. And her son is Pagum, he can't work in the temple, he's not considered a Kohen anymore. So you see how far this went, even though, right, she passes her son from being, and her daughters can't marry Kohanim. So she passes her children, even though it's something that's so unique and only to one individual, she's forbidden. So, meaning the one who's forbidden to everybody, of course, right? The chayve lavim, of course, right, which is like a woman, let's say, who goes like Beit Hillel and marries, right, according to Beit Shammai, she can't get married. It's an Yisur Lav to marry anyone she wants without doing Yibum or Chalitza. So all the more so, she should be forbidden to a Kohen. Can't marry a Kohen. So now the Gemara says, so basically that's saying, even though according to Rabbi Yeshua, these kids of Beit Shammai, let's say, Beit Shammai's kids are Isur Karet, right? They might not be mamzerim, but they are going to be pasul to Kohanim, because this is something they're not allowed to marry the brother. And, right, any brother of theirs, right, it's not just limited to Kohanim. We're going to learn from the Almanah, they're a problem, right? Their kids can't be Kohanim. So now the Gemara wants to understand, okay, so we understand he wasn't worried about Mamzerim, he was worried about Psul Kuna. Either which way he was worried, he didn't want to answer. Now they asked him, can the Tzara, right, could she go get married and not do Yibum, or does she have to do Yibum? That's what they wanted to know. And then he answers them, this very strange answer at the end about the sons of Tzarot who became Kohanim Gdolim. So Gemara asks, they asked about Tzarot. He wouldn't answer that question, and he answers them about the sons. What's going on here? So they say, it seems, Tarte Kabal Mine. They really were asking two questions. Number one, Tzarot Mai. Number one, right, can the Tzarot get married? Can they do Yibum? Or can they just go get married without Yibum? Do we hold Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel? The second part of the question, which you didn't really see inside, but what they were really asking, and you see from his answer, and if you say they can marry like Beit Hillel without Yibum or Chalitza, how are those children going to be perceived in the eyes of the Shammai people? In other words, that's a classic chayve lavim, right? If you marry someone who's chayve lavim, we already said they're not mamzerim unless you're Rabbi Akiva. But they were asking him, what's the status of the children in the eyes of the Beit Shammai people? So l'may nafkamina. They say, what's the difference, right? So they say, well, l'mifshaf lab machzir grushato lebeit hillel. In other words, really, it's a general question about any chayvei lavin. Like, let's say you bring back your wife who you divorced, right? The man divorces his wife. He goes and she marries someone else. Then she comes back and remarries her husband. It's forbidden. That's an isur lav. What's the status of their children? It's a general question they were asking about any chayvei lavin. So what's the answer? He tells them. And here's the question, really. Here are the two sides. Mika amrin on kavachomer. Do we use the kavachomer we just made? Right. Last time we made it on Beit Shammai's people, which had done curry. Do we apply it also to lo taseh? And yet b'na pagum. So zoshi suah shaveh b'kol ein odin sheb'na pagum. Right? If the almanah to a kohen gadol is only forbidden to one person in the whole community, and yet we're going to passel her child, we're going to say he can't marry, right? She can't marry a kohen. So all the more so, we should assume someone who's forbidden to everybody, right? Where she can never, any chayvei lavim, like a machzir grushato, is to anybody who she was married to. All the more so, her son should be pagum and can't marry kohen. Or maybe you could say, the almanah herself becomes a chalala. She herself can't marry a kohen. If you marry someone, your machzir grushato, the woman gets remarried to her husband when she wasn't allowed to. She's not forbidden to a kohen. Okay, she doesn't become forbidden. It's only a question of her children. So Amar Lahu, what did he answer? So now remember, there were two questions. So the first question about the tzarot, do they have to do yibum or can they just go get married? Tzarot mityareni, right? I'm not answering you about that. B'nei tzarot ani me'id lahem. But when it comes to the children of chayvei lavim, I'm going to tell you, these guys, even though Beit Shammai disagreed with them, everybody took them. They were kohanim gedolim. A kohen gadol has to be agreed on by anybody, which means chayvei lavim children are not pasul to kehuna. And that was his answer to them. They're not disqualified for marrying a kohen. So again, in our situation, it would be the Beit Shammai people, when they saw the Beit Hillel people getting married without doing yibum, which would be isur lav, their children are not problematic to Beit Shammai, according to Rabbi Yeshua. That's what he was telling them. Okay, that was all an aside to understand Rabbi Yeshua, but really what we were getting at is that, again, Beit Shammai asu. We ended up with this factions in the people, right? This is where we started. How can there be factions, right? Agudot. But in fact, Beit Shammai continued to do as they perceived. And then the question is just, what's the status of all these children and how do we perceive them and how do we deal with that? So with that, we'll finish for today. We have a little more to go on tomorrow and a fascinating story that we're going to start with. So have a great day, everyone, and we'll pick up from here tomorrow.